Okay, this is going to be one of my more divisive lists. The Doctor. He's a mad old man who lives in a box and grooms invariably attractive ladies. God knows where he finds them all. He's got a sonic screwdriver and a robotic dog and a little yellow car, and, perhaps most intriguingly of all, he can change his entire appearance and personality in an instant. He's like Grindelwald or Tom Cruise. Now, we here at Whatculture love ranking things. We even sit along our desks in order of best to worst, no prizes for guessing where Jack is sitting. So it makes sense that with the approach of Peter Capaldi's successor, we take a look back in time and have a moan about who was mediocre and a cry about who was fantastic. I'm Peter from Whatculture.com, and here are the 13 Doctors ranked from worst to best. Couple of rules before we start. Firstly, yes, 13 Doctors. We're looking specifically at the linear progression from Hartnell to Capaldi, so the Meta-Crisis Doctor, the Dream Lord, and Peter Cushing's Doctor Who character back in the TARDIS with you. And we'll have to wait a few hundred years before the Valeyard and the Curator get a spot on the list. And secondly, this isn't just a critique of the actors. What we're looking at here is the character's appearance, personality, writing, direction, and acting, all in one big doctory package. So keep that in mind. Right, allons-y. Number 13, Colin Baker, the 6th Doctor. Cliched, I know, but it sort of had to be. Now, I do feel sorry for Baker himself, because though he forever ends up at the bottom end of lists like this, the unpopularity of his character is really not his fault. For one thing, it didn't help that the show went off air for literally a year and a half after just 4 of his episodes had gone out, but mostly it was his character's design that was completely arse about tit. His in-your-face outfit completely overshot the twee quirkiness that previous incarnations had been gifted by the wardrobe department, and instead screamed a sort of look-at-me arrogance that the character himself had in bucket loads. Baker's dialogue, which his proponents call sassy, was often just irritating and obnoxious. Take his very first few lines, for example.
Doctor?
You're expecting someone else? That's 3 eyes in one breath. Makes you sound a rather egotistical young lady.
For a while, the 6th Doctor was outright nasty. This is the incarnation who tried to strangle his own female companion, so unless that's old High Gallifreyan for peace among worlds, it's a blot in his copybook, if you ask me. If the writers were aiming for a dark persona, they missed by a country light year. There's a fine line between being sinister and being a bit of a c***. Number 12, Sylvester McCoy, the 7th Doctor. A limited budget and low production values are a pair of cruel mistresses. By the late 80s, Doctor Who was becoming incredibly stale despite advances in visual effects technology, and McCoy sadly fell victim to the BBC churning out lame stories wrapped up in campy pantomime direction. While the 7th Doctor was pretty likeable and just about avoided overstepping the mark with his madcap alienness, he was arguably too artful to actually engage the viewer, frequently seeming to be in total control of the situation. There was no threat there. Except, of course, for the infamous Dragonfire cliffhanger, where he inexplicably chooses to just dangle himself over the edge of an ice cliff for literally no reason whatsoever, and then immediately regrets the decision before the episode cuts to the credits. What? This is McCoy's run in a nutshell. Entertaining to a degree, no doubt, but brazen and overly theatrical purely for the sake of it. Number 11, William Hartnell, the 1st Doctor. To me, Hartnell could just as easily be near the top of this list as 3rd from the bottom. The issue here is not whether he was ever a great Doctor. I mean, he set the precedent, right? But it's that bizarrely, what it is to be a good Doctor has arguably changed so much since then. Even Hartnell's biggest fans would struggle to deny that he was often a grumpy, patronising, even cold character, something the writers themselves later referenced in The 5 Doctors when Pertwee's incarnation noted the 1st Doctor's confounded arrogance. Compared to pretty much everyone that followed, the 1st Doctor seemed to lack empathy for humans, and I suspect his latter few incarnations would barely recognise him today. Furthermore, Hartnell himself, bless him, often came across as rather doddery, flubbing his lines on a regular basis.
You're the cause of this disaster, and you're both knocked both Susan and I unconscious.
Don't be ridiculous, we were all knocked out.
However, that didn't stop him being incredibly popular with viewers of the time. He benefited from fairly competent writing and production, for 1960s television of course, and shone through in occasional moments of warmth, such as his last words to granddaughter Susan.
Until then, there must be no regrets, no tears, no anxieties. Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine.
Number 10, John Hurt, the War Doctor. John Hurt's War Doctor was one of many incarnations that really split the crowd. Quick reminder though, this is not just an appraisal of the actor. The late great John Hurt was a much beloved figure, an exceedingly talented performer, but he gets a relatively low spot in this list purely for how wasted his character was. Granted, there was only so much that could be done in a 77-minute special, but I still felt that a character as pivotal as this should have had more to him than just a few fleeting shots of the Time War and then 40 minutes of pretty much playing third fiddle to the fangirls' favourites. This is the Doctor who destroyed Gallifrey. This moment is literally what the new generation of Doctor Who had been leading up to ever since Eccleston's first outing, and effectively, he just moaned at the other two for being young and silly. He might as well have been wearing slippers and had a neighbourhood watch sticker stuck to his TARDIS window. His spine-tingling reveal at the end of The Name of the Doctor is a big redeemer, but not really enough to get him any higher than the 10th spot. Number 9, Paul McGann, the 8th Doctor. While McGann's audio stories were frequently terrific, the Doctor Who TV movie was a bit off. While it did have that more meaningful and dynamic companion relationship we've now come to know and love, as well as a whole lot of new Who-style running, it was ultimately just too American for me, missing a bit of the franchise's weird British eccentricity. I mean, we say words like kerfuffle and collywobbles over here, but he seemed more interested in necking on with Grace and riding motorbikes. However, Paul McGann still trumps the War Doctor for me, because in the faultless mini-episode, The Night of the Doctor, he got exactly the kind of treatment I'd wanted for John Hurt. He was the well-meant hero with a war-born rage, which Eccleston also pulled off brilliantly. It's one of the most intriguing parts of the character and should always be explored wherever possible. McGann slipped back into the TV role as though he'd never left, portraying a confident, enigmatic character with that classic Doctor wit.
Where are we going?
Back of the ship.
Why?
Because the front crashes first. Think it through.
The Night of the Doctor was one of the greatest shorts the show has ever put out, and it was all down to this performance. Number 8, Peter Capaldi, the 12th Doctor. This is Stephen Moffat's fault. Who loves gloomy, complicated messes with overly atmospheric lighting? Stephen Moffat. Only Stephen Moffat. I don't know how intentional it was, but everything from the moody personality, electric guitar, black hoodie, and sonic shades, oh god, makes the 12th Doctor and Moffat himself look like they're going through a sickening midlife crisis. It's cringier than dad dancing and not remotely amusing. That's not to say, of course, that Dr. 12 hasn't had his own moments. The conversations with Davros in The Magician's Apprentice and Witches Familiar were absolutely superb. He handled Clara's betrayal in Dark Water masterfully, and episodes like Listen demonstrated that Capaldi, and by extension the 12th Doctor, is one hell of an able monologuer. Unfortunately though, while a whole lot was added to the character's mysterious mythology, it was all marred by Moff's inexplicable desire to make it borderline impossible for you to keep up, and this old, sociopathic and all too alien incarnation unjustly suffered for it. Number 7, Peter Davison, the 5th Doctor. Following Tom Baker is one hell of a tricky gig, but Peter Davison, the youngest Doctor ever at the time, did a pretty respectable job. I do feel he never really came into his own until his swan song, The Caves of Androzari, previously seeming a bit too human and more of a like-minded friend than an impossible time-travelling alien, but hey, you can't criticise a guy for being likeable. Davison's performance was wholly inoffensive, but for me just lacked a certain something. Number 6, Jon Pertwee, the 3rd Doctor. You'd think that having the Doctor stranded on Earth with a clamped TARDIS for a whole season would make for fairly dull viewing. In fact, I don't really know how the pitch got through the board meeting, but watching Pertwee nipping around in Bessie as a member of UNIT was actually charming. What's perhaps most interesting about the 3rd Doctor is that despite his relatively old appearance, he was more athletic and energetic than he'd ever been before, though that didn't stop him also coming across as even more intelligent and scientifically minded either. Firm but fair when he needed to be with a dry, charismatic delivery, the 3rd Doctor was the product of great acting, writing and production all working together, and he wound up being one of the more unique and interesting incarnations, very worthy of the first on-screen encounters with the Master. Number 5, Patrick Troughton, the 2nd Doctor. If William Hartnell was a grouchy grandfather, Patrick Troughton, his immediate successor, was a kindly granddad. There's a difference. It was pleasantly jarring to see the petulant first incarnation dramatically transform into this cheery, silly character who's probably been more of an influence on modern Who than any other. Troughton brought us the running, jumping and running some more Doctor we still have today. He had a sonic screwdriver which actually unscrewed screws, and he threw out plenty of humorous lines, one of which is still occasionally referenced.
Oh, I can see you've been doing the TARDIS up a bit. I don't like it.
You've had this place redecorated, haven't you? Don't like it.
Come on, Doctor.
Oh, you've redecorated. I don't like it.
His gentle, gravelly voice and kind face cemented the Doctor's role in the universe as a sympathetic, empathetic healer and guardian, and never more so did he show this than when confronting Victoria over her father's death in the tomb of the Cybermen.
I shall never forget him. Never.
No, of course you won't. But, you know, the memory of him won't always be a sad one.
The second Doctor may not have seemed as brave as some others, but it added that little bit of humanity to a suitably alien performance. And perhaps the braver man was Troughton himself, who stepped into Hartnell's beloved role and proved that replacing the Doctor's actor via regeneration could work. If he'd not aced this performance, the show would never have lasted 50 years. Number 4, Christopher Eccleston, the 9th Doctor. Eccleston was another actor with an exceedingly difficult and important job, successfully bringing Doctor Who back onto TV screens and introducing a whole new generation to the character is no mean feat, and not only did he manage to make us laugh while he juggled all this responsibility, but he also managed to bring out the fiery rage and post-war emotion of a man who'd relatively recently destroyed 2 entire races. It's all too easy for writers and the actor to resort to making the Doctor socially awkward, ho-ho, look at me, in order to make him seem alien, see Peter Capaldi's Doctor. But not the 9th version. He had plenty of smiles, hugs and jokes to give, but it was his shame and fear of his own power that made him seem something more than human. The reason he's not even higher in this list is simply that, like McGann, I'd just like to have seen more of him. It still hurts a little bit that he left after 1 season and then didn't even return for Day of the Doctor. Ouch. Number 3, Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor. In the same way that Davison, youngest Doctor of the old generation, had to somehow follow Tom Baker's ultra-popular incarnation, the even younger Matt Smith had the gargantuan task of following fan favourite David Tennant, and he somehow managed to steal hearts almost instantly. In my experience, the 11th Doctor seems to actually be a lot of people's entry point to the show, and thankfully he demonstrated to viewers new and old an excellent range, the full breadth of the character, fiercely protective of those he loved, almost frighteningly so, and yet childlike in equal measure. Matt Smith's spotless performances, if not for poor writing from his 2nd season onwards, could have had the 11th Doctor competing even with number 2, David Tennant, the 10th Doctor. Doctor number 10 has an immense legacy. As with the previous 2 entries, it's Tennant's fantastic scope that sticks in my mind. As lovable as he was fearsome, this incarnation fueled the mythology wonderfully. David Tennant managed to convey the Doctor's alien traits very subtly, but not so much so that he came across as the very human-like Davison. However, there was a slightly bitter taste left by his regeneration in my very humble opinion. It might have been the crowning moment for a lot of people, but saying I don't want to go was just too on the nose for me. Sure, it still hit me right in the feels, is that what they're saying nowadays? #woke. But given that few other incarnations have ever reacted to regeneration in that manner, I feel like it lessened the self-respect of other equally beloved Doctors. But then, here he is at number 2 in the list, so maybe I'm talking shit. And number 1, Tom Baker, the 4th Doctor. Tom Baker had the longest continuous on-screen reign, and that was no accident. Remembered fondly for his blustering eccentricity and rather comical appearance, the 4th Doctor is a cultural icon, to the point that Tom Baker was granted a very special guest appearance in The Day of the Doctor as the curator. Genesis of the Daleks will always be one of my favourite stories for its impeccable writing and brilliant Doctor and villain dynamic. It was rather disappointing that this incarnation ended his run by accidentally falling off a pylon, but boy did he have a good innings. I think the 4th Doctor himself put it best when he stated, "You may be a Doctor, but I am the Doctor." The definite article, you might say. So that's my big old list. Please do comment below telling me why your Doctor's better than mine. As always, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and you can visit whatculture.com for more wibbly wobbly lists, news and articles. I'm Peter from whatculture.com, and I'll see you soon.